Welcome to Center Stage. I'm Mikhailo Curry. Canadian-Ukrainian composer Larissa Kuzmenko's star continues to shine brightly. Currently, she is nominated for a Juno Award for her piano concerto. She's also just been commissioned to compose a composition for a major Canadian symphony orchestra. And lastly, but not least, her Voice of Hope commemoration of the Holodomor will be performed on December 17th. Larissa Kuzmenko, my very special guest today on Center Stage. Toronto-based composer Larissa Kuzmenko has had her music performed and broadcast around the world by some of the finest musicians on the planet today.
I started performing when I was around 8 or 9 years old, but I started to play the piano when I was 4, so I was a pianist first before I became a composer. It's an interesting story how I became a composer. I became a composer when my dad took me to Niagara Falls, and he decided to take a picture of me on the stone wall. And I have severe vertigo, so I was shaking terribly. So he takes this picture, and I'm just traumatized by this, and I thought, how do I express this emotion? You know, who do I talk to about this? So I thought, well, how about if I write a piece of music that reflects my emotion? And that fear, I put into my very first opus called The Falls. And that's the only piece I have memorized. Everything else, I don't have anything. I remember it's in C minor, and it's pretty scary. There's a shaky little part in there. So I started at 7, and I thought, hey, this is wonderful. I can actually write music that, you know, reflects my emotions. So my music became almost like a diary of my life. Well, my first composition teacher was Sam Dolan. It was interesting. He only took people on who he thought had some kind of talent and had hope. So you would bring a portfolio in those days, you know, pile of music. So I brought him my music, and he said that, you know, this is very good. I would love to teach you. And I was really thrilled to study with him because he only took a limited amount of students. And all my pieces were very, very tonal, and I wrote a lot of sequences in those days. I remember he'd say, oh, you wrote too many sequences, you know, no more than 3, that's enough. After that, it becomes corny. So I wrote a lot of corn in those days. But then he was very helpful. He never looked at the music and took pencil to paper and erased it and changed it, like when I studied with Oscar Morvis. He actually had this drill eraser. When I would come to study with him, he put this eraser at the end of this drill, and I'd have these holes in my music. You know, we didn't have photocopying machines in those days, so I couldn't make a copy of it. But Sam was great. He would say, well, go home, look at a score by Beethoven and see how he develops material and come with something the following week, you know, write another sonata. Before I would write things that were almost like a collage of ideas. I write one idea, another idea, and so on. It was just joined together. But then I learned how to actually get some kind of compositional technique.
Larissa Kuzmenko's Voice of Hope for soprano and string orchestra took her on a very personal musical journey.
I actually dedicate this piece to my mother's family that died from starvation. Her grandmother died, her 7 brothers and sisters died, her stepfather died. The last person to die was her mother. Apparently they came and put a sheet over her, you know, face because my mom couldn't see this anymore, and she was so traumatized by this. She was the only one survived because she went in the forest and she picked out snails off the trees and would smash them and cook them to death and just eat this, and there was protein there for her, where the others, they had like onions with some salt, and that would just make the body not accept that. It would just swell up the body and they would just die. It was very traumatic for her. She became an orphan. She was, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 years old at the time. And to see everybody die one at a time was very difficult. And she told me some horror stories of things, of people eating whatever, you know. I don't know. To me, that is almost fiction, you know. But I wanted to write this piece of music. It's interesting, the process. It's almost as if I was there. I was writing this piece in my basement, And there was a pillow that had a picture. It was a Ukrainian sort of picture of a church, and there was snow falling, and the people around it. And I was thinking how cold it would have been, people dying from starvation. And it was almost as if someone took my hand, put a pencil in it, and wrote this music. It just came, because sometimes you have this, mental block, it doesn't work. I'd sit and look at a bar for like 4 hours and just go to the mall or something, do something else. But this it wrote itself. It made so much sense to me because I was, it's personal. I spoke to my mother about it, and I could feel her emotions. Many times she would be crying. I could hear her at night crying when I lived at home. And then she would bring it up again. And so I had to do something. I had to write this. And I think it's good for future generations to know that there's something like this available, that this has to stay alive, that people should know about it.
Larissa has been nominated for a Juno Award, the highest award of merit from the Canadian music industry.
This piano concerto is very traditional. In fact, Maestro Peter Unjin heard it, and he actually gave me a call and said, gee, if he were a pianist, he'd be playing this piece. So that's a real compliment, I got tremendous reviews for this CD. Christina Petrovska played this with the Toronto Symphony. Yes, there is a piano concerto number 2 and 3, but they're a little bit different. One is a double concerto with piano and percussion, and the other one is with brass band. Christina Petrovska, what a tremendous performer, and she got incredible reviews for performing this work, and I got really good reviews for the CD itself.
And it's nominated for a
Yeah, the Canadian Music Centre put in for a nomination for a Juno Award. There is a commission coming up. It's an orchestral commission, and it's going to be one of the most exciting commissions ever for me. I can't really tell you who it's for, but it is orchestral, and
for a major Canadian orchestra.
For a major Canadian orchestra, and for choir. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to writing this piece. And I got this commission, the Aboriginal work for orchestra, and it was supposed to be for Orchestra London and in this quartet, but they're planning to take it on tour everywhere and add a film component to it. I had mentioned this before. I had written a work for piano trio, a new work for little kids for the grade 9 conservatory called Silver Birds. And I'm published by Plangerie. It's a new publishing company. My choral work was just published by Boosey and Hawkes in New York. So I'm published with Boosey and Hawkes. I have several pieces there. And it's really nice to hear from people from all over the world complimenting my little songs that I wrote for children. And I love to write for children, like children's piano pieces, choral works. Just finished writing a Christmas carol for the Kingston Choral, Children's Choral Society. If it weren't for my family, I wouldn't be in the music business, I talked to a lot of people who, well, some of my students whose parents are not supporting them in the music, and they really want to be musicians, but they want them to be, doctors or businessmen, this sort of thing. But my parents were always there for me, and I'll never forget my dad. My dad was always driving me to my piano lesson in a hurricane. It really doesn't matter. There's a tornado over there, Dad. Let's go. It doesn't matter. You're going for your piano lesson. And I'm really sorry that he's not around to see the success that I've had now. He died in 1992. But he was really, really happy that I went to Ukraine and they performed my marimba vibraphone concerto there. That just made his whole life. And they actually broadcast a work of mine on the radio, a Ukrainian work, and he got to hear it.
Larissa Kuzmenko's composition Voice of Hope will be performed on Friday, December 17th at 8 p.m. at the Markham Center for the Performing Arts. We thank Larissa for spending time with us today. I'm Mykhailo Curry, Center Stage for Contact. See you next time. Toronto-based composer Larissa Kuzmenko has had her music performed and broadcast around the world by some of the finest musicians on the planet today. Welcome to Center Stage. I'm Mykhailo Curry. Canadian-Ukrainian composer Larissa Kuzmenko's star continues to shine brightly. Currently, she is nominated for a Juno Award for her piano concerto. She's also just been commissioned to compose a composition for a major Canadian symphony orchestra. And lastly, but not least, her Voice of Hope commemoration of the Holodomor will be performed on December 17th. Larissa Kuzmenko, my very special guest today on Center Stage.
I started performing when I was around 8 or 9 years old, but I started to play the piano when I was 4, so I was a pianist first before I became a composer. It's an interesting story how I became a composer. I became a composer when my dad took me to Niagara Falls, and he decided to take a picture of me on the stone wall. And I have severe vertigo, so I was shaking terribly. So he takes this picture, and I'm just traumatized by this, and I thought, how do I express this emotion? You know, who do I talk